Hello, good morning. Today we'll be discussing Aristotle versus Plato, a comparison. In our earlier lecture, we had talked about a brief introduction of Aristotle. Now, because Aristotle has been largely influenced by Plato, who was his teacher, so it's really relevant to talk about what are the differences and similarities between Aristotle and Plato, and how is Aristotle influenced by Plato. So, Aristotle and Plato were both philosophers in ancient Greece and who critically studied matters of ethics, science, politics, and lots of more philosophical subjects. Though many more of Plato's works survived the centuries, Aristotle's contributions have arguably been more influential, particularly when it comes to science and logical reasoning. While both philosophers' works are considered less theoretically valuable in modern times, they still continue to have a great historical value or importance in our lives. So, in a simple comparison, we can just elaborate or find that what are the notable ideas or interests of both the writers. So, if we compare the ideas, then we can say that the notable ideas of Plato are the golden mean, reason, logic, biology, and passion. And on the other hand, there are theory of forms, Platonic idealism, Platonic realism. So, one talks about politics, metaphysics, science, logic, and ethics, and other rhetoric, art, literature, justice, virtue, politics, education, family, and so on and so forth. Next, I have given you in the PDF that which corroborates with this regarding the place of birth and the influences that both had on their lives and on their works. Then is the influence of Aristotle versus Plato. Plato influenced Aristotle just as Socrates influenced Plato, but each man's influence moved in different areas after their deaths. Plato became the primary Greek philosopher based on his ties to Socrates and Aristotle and the presence of his works, which were used until his academy closed in 529 AD, and his works were then copied through Europe. For centuries, classical education assigned Plato's works as a required reading, and the Republic was the premier work on political theory until the 19th century, and it was admired not only for its views but also for its elegant prose. On the other hand, Aristotle and his works became the basis for both religion and science, especially through the Middle Ages. In religion, Aristotelian ethics were the basis for St. Thomas Aquinas' works that forged Christian thought on free will and role of virtue. Aristotle's scientific observations were considered the last word in knowledge until about the 16th century, when Renaissance thought challenged and eventually replaced much of it. Even so, Aristotle's empirical approach based on observation, hypothesis, and direct experience is part of the basis for scientific activity in almost nearly every field of study. Then there are the works of Aristotle and Plato. Whereas most of Plato's works have survived through the centuries, roughly 80% of what Aristotle wrote has been lost. He is said to have written almost 200 treatises on an array of subjects, but only 31 have survived. Some of his other works are referenced or alluded to by contemporary scholars, but the original material is gone, it is not found anywhere. What remains of Aristotle's works are primarily lecture notes and teaching aids, draft level material that lacks the polish of finished publications. Even so, these works influenced philosophy, ethics, biology, physics, astronomy, medicine, politics, and religion for many centuries. His most important works, copied hundreds of times by hand throughout ancient and medieval times, were titled Physics de Anima, that means on the soul. Metaphysics, politics, and poetics, these and several other treatises were collected in what was called the Corpus Aristotelicum and often served as the basis for hundreds of private and teaching libraries up to the 19th century. Plato's works can be roughly divided into three periods. His early period featured much of what is known about Socrates, with Plato taking the role of the dutiful student who keeps his tutor's ideas alive. Most of these works are written in the form of dialogues using the Socratic method, which is what is the Socratic method, which is asking questions to explore concepts and knowledge as the basis for teaching. Plato's The Apology, where he discusses the trial of execution and his teacher, is included in this period. Plato's second or the middle period is comprised of works where he explores morality and virtue in individuals and society. He presents lengthy discussions on justice, wisdom, courage, as well as the duality of power and responsibility. Plato's most famous work, The Republic, which was his vision of a utopian society, was written during this period. The third period of Plato's writings mainly discusses the role of arts along with morality and ethics. Plato challenges himself and his ideas in his period, exploring his own conclusions with self-debate. The end result is his philosophy of idealism, where he talks about the truest essence of things that occurs in thought, not reality. In the Theory of Forms and other works, Plato states that only ideas are constant, that the world perceived by senses is deceptive and changeable. Now is the differences in contributions in philosophy. Plato believed that concepts had a universal form and ideal form, which leads to his idealistic philosophy. Aristotle believed that universal forms were not necessarily attached to each other, object or concept, and that each instance of an object or concept had to be analyzed on its own. This viewpoint leads to Aristotelian empiricism. For Plato, thought, experiments, and reasoning would be enough to prove a concept to establish the qualities of an object, whereas Aristotle dismisses this in favor of direct observation and experience. When we talk about logic, Plato was more inclined to use inductive reasoning, whereas Aristotle used deductive reasoning. So, both Aristotle and Plato believed thoughts were superior to the senses. However, Plato believed the senses could fool a person, whereas Aristotle said that senses were needed in order to properly determine reality. In ethics, the link between Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle is most obvious when it comes to their views on ethics. Plato was Socratic in his belief that knowledge is virtue and is an end of itself. This means that to know the good is to do the good. Aristotle, whereas, stated that knowing what was right was not enough, that one had to choose to act in the proper manner. This definition placed Aristotelian ethics on a practical plane rather than the theoretical views espoused by Socrates and Plato. For Socrates and Plato, wisdom is the basic virtue, and Aristotle believed that wisdom was virtuous, but that achieving virtue was neither automatic nor did it grant any unification. Now, in political theory, Plato felt that the individual should subsume his or her interests to that of society in order to achieve a perfect form of government. His Republic described a utopian society where each of the three classes, that is, philosophers, warriors, and workers, had their role, and governance was kept in the hands of those deemed best qualified for that responsibility. Whereas Aristotle saw the basic political unit as the city, which took precedence over the family, which in turn took precedence over the individual. Aristotle said that man was a political animal by nature and therefore could not avoid the challenges of politics. In his view, politics functions more as an organism than as a machine, and the role of the polis, that is the city, was not justice or economic stability, but to create a space where its people could live a good life and perform beautiful acts. Then is the modern appraisal of Aristotle and Plato. Whereas most of Plato's works have survived through the centuries, we can say that Aristotle and Plato are still relevant. They both directly linked to philosophy and the height of Greek culture. Their works are studied less now, and much of what they stated has been either discarded or set aside in favor of new information and theories. To many historians and scientists, Aristotle was an obstacle to scientific progress because his works were deemed so complete that no one challenged them. The adherence to using Aristotle as the final word on many subjects curtailed true observation and experimentation, a fault that lies not with Aristotle but with the use of his works. So, this was a brief introduction and comparison between Aristotle and Plato, which can help in understanding Aristotle more, because when we have something for reference, we are able to understand a subject much more in a better way. Thank you.